At December 3, 1943, 11:47 a.m., Military Police Corporal James Henshaw stood outside Cell Block D at Fort Leavenworth Disciplinary Barracks, watching prisoner 4457 through the bars. The prisoner sat on his bunk, head down, hands clasped. "You'll die a criminal," Henshaw said quietly. The prisoner didn't respond, didn't look up, just sat there, a 23-year-old kid from the Philadelphia shipyards who'd thrown away his life over a stupid fight, sentenced to death by court-martial for striking an officer. Execution scheduled for January 15, 1944, but in 11 months that prisoner would be dead, not from a firing squad, but from enemy fire while saving 127 American soldiers in the bloodiest 38 minutes of the Italian campaign. His name was Private Michael Donnelly. And this is how a condemned man became the most decorated soldier most people have never heard of. Michael Donnelly grew up in South Philadelphia, in the shadow of the Navy Yard where his father worked as a welder. The Donnelly house sat on Mifflin Street, 3 blocks from the Delaware River, in a neighborhood where every third man worked the docks or the shipyards. Michael's father, Patrick, came home every night smelling like hot metal and sweat, hands scarred from 15 years of welding hull plates. Michael started working there at 16, summer job running errands for the welding crews, learning the trade from men who measured their worth in straight seams and watertight joints. He wasn't a troublemaker, wasn't a fighter, but he had his father's stubbornness. Once Michael decided something was right, he wouldn't back down. In the shipyard, that meant refusing to cut corners on safety welds, even when foremen pressured him to work faster. Got him written up twice, got him respected by the older welders who knew what mattered. When Pearl Harbor happened, Michael enlisted the next day, January 1942, age 22. The recruiter asked what skills he had. "I can weld anything to anything," Michael said. They made him infantry anyway. Basic training at Fort Dix, shipped to North Africa in November 1942 with the 34th Infantry Division, Company B, 2nd Battalion. He carried a Browning automatic rifle, 20 pounds of steel and wood that could put out 550 rounds per minute. The BAR gunner was the squad's anchor, the man who laid down covering fire while riflemen maneuvered. It required strength, discipline, and the ability to stay calm when everyone else was running. Michael was good at it. Sergeant Frank Morrison noticed how Donnelly never wasted ammunition, never fired wild. Noticed how the kid from Philadelphia kept his weapon immaculate, breaking it down every night, cleaning every part like he was back in the shipyard inspecting welds. Tunisia was brutal. The 34th Division fought at Kasserine Pass, got bloodied by Rommel's panzers, learned hard lessons about German firepower. Michael learned something else. He learned what happened when equipment failed. March 14, 1943. Company B pinned down by German MG Psi-4, 2 machine gun fire near Hill 609. Private Tommy Russo tried to advance with a bazooka. The weapon misfired. Russo died 15 yards from the German position, shot 7 times while trying to clear the malfunction. Michael watched it happen, watched his friend from basic training bleed out in the North African dirt because a weapon didn't work when it needed to. May 7, 1943. Private James Campbell's M1 Garand jammed during a firefight near Bizerte. Campbell tried to clear it, couldn't, grabbed his sidearm instead. A German sniper shot him through the throat before he could fire. Michael had been 12 feet away, covering Campbell's position with the BAR. He killed the sniper. Didn't matter. Campbell bled out in 90 seconds, drowning in his own blood, eyes locked on Michael's, terrified and confused. Michael held his hand until it went limp. The division took 30% casualties in Tunisia. Michael survived without a scratch, but he started staying up at night, checking his BAR obsessively. He'd field strip it in the dark, feel every component, memorize every spring and pin. He knew the manual said to clean it weekly. He cleaned it daily, sometimes twice. Sergeant Morrison asked why. "Can't let it fail," Michael said. "Can't watch another guy die because his weapon didn't work." Sicily came next, July 1943. The 34th Division landed at Licata, pushed inland through heat that turned steel too hot to touch. German resistance was fierce, organized, professional. Michael's squad fought through 3 weeks of hedgerow-to-hedgerow combat, losing 2 more men to equipment failures. Private Eddie Romano's grenade didn't explode, dud. He died trying to throw a second one. Corporal Stephen Hayes's ammunition belt twisted in his machine gun feed. The gun jammed. Hayes died trying to fix it under fire. By August, Michael had stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night. He'd lie in his bedroll, thinking about Russo and Campbell and Romano and Hayes. Good soldiers. Dead because metal failed or ammunition misfired, or some factory worker in Detroit rushed through quality control. The Army's official casualty reports listed them as killed in action. Technically true, but Michael knew better. They'd been killed by malfunction, by bad luck, by the gap between how weapons were supposed to work and how they actually worked, in mud and heat and terror. September 8, 1943, Italy surrendered. The Germans didn't. They dug in, turned the Italian peninsula into a fortress, made the Allies pay for every mile. The 34th Division landed at Salerno, pushed north toward Naples. Company B got assigned to a forward position near Altavilla, holding a ridge overlooking a German supply route. 4 days of steady shelling. On the 5th day, Michael's squad leader, Sergeant Morrison, took shrapnel to the chest from an 88 mm artillery round. Morrison didn't die immediately. Took him 40 minutes. Michael sat with him, trying to stop the bleeding, knowing it was useless. Morrison's last words were barely audible. "Keep them alive, Donnelly, however you can." 2 hours later, a replacement lieutenant arrived, fresh from officers' candidate school. 23 years old, never seen combat. Lieutenant Andrew Graves, clean uniform, pressed creases, regulation haircut. He inspected the squad's weapons, found Michael's BAR disassembled for cleaning. "Why is this weapon not combat-ready, Private?" Graves demanded. Michael looked up from the receiver he was wiping down. "It's always combat-ready, sir. I'm just maintaining it." Graves didn't like the tone. "You'll maintain it on the schedule prescribed in the manual, not before. Not after. You understand?" Michael felt something shift in his chest. That stubbornness his father had, that refusal to compromise on what mattered. "Respectfully, sir, the manual's written for peacetime. This isn't peacetime." Graves' face went red. "Are you questioning my orders, Private?" Michael stood up slowly, still holding the BAR receiver. "I'm saying I've watched 5 men die from weapons that failed. I won't let it happen to anyone else." Graves stepped closer, voice rising. "You'll follow regulations, or you'll face disciplinary action." Michael didn't back down, didn't raise his voice, just stood there, grease on his hands, conviction in his eyes. "Then write me up, sir, but I'm not letting my weapon fail. What happened next, accounts vary." Graves claimed Michael shoved him. Michael claimed Graves grabbed his collar and he pulled away. Either way, physical contact occurred between an enlisted man and an officer. Witnesses were split, but the result was unambiguous. Court-martial for assaulting an officer. Maximum penalty, death. The trial lasted 3 days. November 1943, Fort Leavenworth. Military judges heard testimony from Lieutenant Graves, heard Michael's defense, reviewed witness statements. The prosecution argued that military discipline was absolute, that any physical resistance to an officer, regardless of provocation, constituted a capital offense in wartime. Michael's defense attorney, a captain from JAG who'd handled 17 previous cases and lost 16, argued self-defense in extenuating circumstances. The judges deliberated 6 hours. Verdict: guilty. Sentence: death by firing squad. Execution date: January 15, 1944. Michael sat in cell block D for 3 weeks. No visitors allowed. No mail permitted. Just 4 gray walls and the knowledge that he'd thrown away his life defending a principle about weapon maintenance. Corporal Henshaw, the guard, brought him meals 3 times a day. Sometimes they'd talk. Henshaw had fought in World War I, knew what combat meant. "You really think it mattered?" Henshaw asked one day. "Cleaning that gun more than regulations required?" Michael looked at him. "I know 5 men who'd still be alive if their weapons hadn't failed. Henshaw shook his head. You'll die a criminal, kid. That's all anyone will remember. December 23, 1943. Michael's attorney arrived with unexpected news. The Judge Advocate General had reviewed the case, found procedural irregularities. The death sentence was commuted to 20 years hard labor. Michael would serve his time, then receive a dishonorable discharge. No veterans' benefits, no honor, just prison and shame. The attorney seemed pleased, thought it was good news. Michael just nodded. 20 years or death, either way, his life was over. But the attorney had more information. The 34th Division was being rebuilt after heavy losses in Italy, needed experienced combat soldiers. The Army had a program, officially classified, unofficially known as the Suicide Squads. Soldiers facing long sentences could volunteer for the most dangerous combat assignments. No guarantees, no promises, but if you survived enough missions, your sentence might be reduced. Maybe the attorney didn't recommend it. Said the mortality rate was 80%. Michael signed the papers that afternoon. January 4, 1944. Michael shipped back to Italy, assigned to Company B, 2nd Battalion, 34th Infantry Division. Same unit he'd left. None of the original squad remained. All dead, wounded, or rotated home. New faces, new squad leader. Staff Sergeant Vincent Marcelli, no relation to the Eddie Romano who died in Sicily, but that coincidence felt like a ghost. Marcelli knew Michael's story, knew about the court-martial, the sentence, the volunteer suicide mission program. I don't care what you did, Marcelli said quietly. You're here now. You carry the BAR. You keep us alive. We keep you alive. That's the deal. The other men were wary at first. A condemned soldier, a criminal in their ranks. But Michael didn't try to explain or justify. He just did the work. Cleaned his BAR twice a day. Volunteered for the worst positions. Never complained. Never asked for anything. Within 2 weeks, the wariness faded. They started calling him Saint Mike, not because he was religious, but because of his obsessive devotion to weapon maintenance. He'd help anyone clean their rifle, fix a jammed magazine, adjust a sling. Turned it into a ritual, something meditative and careful in the middle of chaos. The 34th Division was preparing for a major offensive. Monte Cassino, the Germans held the high ground, had turned an ancient monastery into a fortress. Allied command wanted it taken, needed it taken. The battle would become one of the bloodiest of the entire Italian campaign. Company B got assigned to the initial assault, February 15, 1944. Michael had been back in combat for 6 weeks. The night before the attack, Michael couldn't sleep. He sat in a bombed-out barn the company was using for shelter, field stripping his BAR for the 3rd time that day. Private First Class Anthony Marchetti, 19 years old, from Boston, watched from his bedroll. "You really think that makes a difference?" Marchetti asked. "All that cleaning?" Michael didn't look up. "Kept me alive in Tunisia, Sicily. Might keep you alive tomorrow." Marchetti thought about that. "How many rounds you figure that gun's fired?" Michael knew exactly. 41,600, give or take. Marchetti whistled. "Things should be worn out." Michael smiled slightly. "That's why I clean it." February 15, 1944, 5:23 a.m. Company B moved into assault positions below Monte Cassino. The monastery loomed above them, medieval stone walls on a hilltop, German machine gun positions commanding every approach. Allied artillery had been pounding it for 3 days. Hadn't made a difference. The Germans were dug in deep, protected by rock and rubble and centuries-old stone. The assault plan was simple, brutal, and probably suicidal. Advance up the slope under covering fire, reach the German defensive line, break through by force. Expected casualties, 40-60%. Michael's squad was in the first wave, 12 men, including Sergeant Marcelli. Michael carried the BAR and 600 rounds of ammunition, 20 pounds of weapon, 30 pounds of ammunition, plus grenades, canteen, first aid kit. Total combat load, 78 pounds. His position was on the left flank, where the slope was steepest but provided some cover from a rocky outcropping. At 6:02 a.m., Allied artillery stopped. Silence for 15 seconds. Then whistles blew. Company B advanced. The German machine guns opened up immediately. MG-42s firing 1,200 rounds per minute, creating a sound like ripping canvas. Tracers arced down the slope, bright orange in the dawn light. Men started falling. Michael ran low, zigzagging, trying to use every rock and crater for cover. Sergeant Marcelli was 10 yards ahead, waving the squad forward. The BAR was heavy, slowing Michael down. But he'd carried it for 18 months and knew how to move with its weight. 70 yards up the slope, Marcelli went down, shot through the leg. Michael saw him fall, saw him try to get up, saw him collapse. No time to think. Michael sprinted to Marcelli's position, dropped behind a boulder, grabbed the sergeant's web gear and dragged him into cover. Blood everywhere. Femoral artery hit. Marcelli was conscious, eyes wide, breathing fast. "Leave me," he said. Michael ignored him, pulled out his first aid kit, tried to stop the bleeding. Couldn't. Too much damage. The rest of the squad was pinned down, scattered across 50 yards of slope, unable to advance or retreat. The German machine gun that had hit Marcelli was positioned behind a stone wall 200 yards upslope, perfect field of fire. Every time someone moved, it fired. Private Marchetti tried to low crawl to better cover. The MG-42 stitched the ground 6 inches from his head, forced him to freeze. They were trapped. Michael looked at Marcelli. The sergeant's breathing was shallow now, eyes losing focus. "Get them out," Marcelli whispered. "Get them home." Then his eyes closed. Michael felt that familiar feeling from the shipyard, from basic training, from every firefight in North Africa and Sicily and Italy. That refusal to accept the unacceptable. He looked at the German machine gun position, looked at his squad, pinned and helpless, looked at his BAR. The weapon manual said the Browning automatic rifle was effective to 600 yards in the hands of a trained marksman. Michael had fired over 40,000 rounds through this particular gun. He knew its quirks, its tendencies. Knew it pulled slightly left at ranges over 300 yards. Knew the bipod wobbled if you didn't lock it properly. Knew exactly how much to lead a moving target at different distances. What he was thinking was impossible. The BAR wasn't designed for what he had in mind. But Michael Donnelly had spent his entire life making things work that weren't supposed to work. He pulled the bipod from his pack, locked it to the barrel shroud, extended the legs, positioned himself behind the boulder, weapon rested on the bipod, body pressed flat to the ground. The German position was 210 yards upslope, partially obscured by the stone wall. Michael could see muzzle flash, could track the gun's position by the tracers. He calculated windage, slight crosswind from the left, maybe 5 miles per hour. Calculated elevation, steep upward angle, probably 28 degrees. Calculated lead time for the German gunner's movement pattern. He took a breath. Let it out halfway. Squeezed the trigger. The BAR barked. 20-round magazine. Michael fired in 3-round bursts, methodical, precise. First burst high, adjusted. Second burst hit the stone wall, showered the position with fragments. Third burst, he saw the German gunner flinch, saw the MG-42's tracers go wild. Fourth burst, fifth burst, the MG-42 stopped firing. Complete silence for 3 seconds. Then the German gun opened up again, but from a different angle, different position. They'd moved. Michael tracked the new muzzle flash, adjusted his aim, fired again, 3-round bursts. Methodical, disciplined, the way his father welded, straight, steady, no wasted motion. The second gunner lasted 8 seconds before the position went silent. Another MG-42 opened fire from 30 yards to the right of the first position. Michael swung the BAR, didn't rush, didn't panic, aimed, fired. The gun went silent. Then another position opened up. Michael engaged it, silenced it. Then another, then another. He was doing something no one thought possible. He was suppressing 3 German machine gun positions with a weapon designed for close-range support fire. The BAR wasn't a sniper rifle, wasn't a heavy machine gun, But in Michael's hands, with 40,000 rounds of practice and absolute mechanical knowledge, it became something else entirely. Private Marchetti, still pinned 50 yards away, watched in disbelief. Watched St. Mike fire burst after burst, changing magazines smoothly, never rushing, never missing. Watched German positions go silent, one by one. "Move," Michael shouted between bursts. "Goddamn move." The squad started moving. Low crawls at first, then running crouch. They reached Michael's position, dove into cover behind the boulder. 8 men left of the original 12. Michael kept firing, keeping the German guns suppressed. "Magazine," he called. Private Jennings slapped a fresh 20 round mag into his hand. Michael locked it in, kept firing. More squads from Company B saw what was happening, saw one man suppressing an entire section of the German line. They started advancing, using Michael's covering fire to push up the slope. Within 5 minutes, 40 American soldiers were moving forward, gaining ground that had seemed impossible 10 minutes earlier. The German positions responded, more machine guns, rifle fire, a mortar barrage that walked across the slope, searching for Michael's position. He kept firing, kept calm. A mortar round hit 15 yards away, showered him with dirt and rock fragments. Didn't matter, he fired through it. Another magazine, another position suppressed. The barrel was getting hot now, almost too hot to touch. The manual said to change barrels after 150 rounds of sustained fire. Michael had fired over 300. The gun kept working. At 6:18 a.m., 16 minutes into the assault, American soldiers reached the first German defensive line. Close-range fighting, grenades, bayonets, chaos. Michael couldn't fire anymore, couldn't risk hitting friendly forces. He grabbed his weapon and moved forward, joining the assault. The German defenders were elite troops, veterans of the Russian front, disciplined and determined. But they hadn't expected one American soldier to neutralize their overlapping fields of fire. Hadn't expected their entire defensive plan to collapse because one man with a BAR fought like it was a different weapon entirely. The momentum shifted. Company B pushed through the first line, then the second. By 6:31 a.m. they'd advanced 180 yards, farther than any Allied unit had penetrated in 3 days of attacks. Then the counterattack came. German reserves, a full company, maybe 120 men moving down from positions near the monastery. They hit Company B's exposed flank just as the American forces were reorganizing after the breakthrough. Machine gun fire, grenades. The Americans fell back, tried to hold, got pushed. They were outnumbered, outflanked, about to be overrun. Michael saw it happening. Saw men he'd fought beside for 6 weeks about to die. Saw the entire assault collapsing. He looked at his BAR. Looked at the German counterattack flowing down the slope. Made a decision. He moved to the highest point of captured ground, a small stone wall that gave him elevation and a clear field of fire. Alone. No cover from flanking fire. Complete exposure. Suicide position. He set up the bipod, locked in a fresh magazine, and started firing. The German advance faltered. Soldiers dropped, dove for cover, tried to identify where the fire was coming from. Michael fired in controlled bursts, picking targets methodically. Officer first, the one waving soldiers forward. Squad leader second, the one organizing the advance. Machine gunner third, the one setting up a base of fire. He worked through them systematically, the way he'd field-stripped weapons 1,000 times, muscle memory and practiced precision. German return fire concentrated on his position. Bullets hit the stone wall, chipped fragments that cut his face and hands. A round grazed his left shoulder, barely felt it. Another hit his helmet, knocked it sideways, rang his ears but didn't penetrate. He kept firing. Another magazine. Another. The BAR's barrel was glowing red now, heat waves visible in the morning air. Any other weapon would have warped, jammed, failed. Michael's BAR kept firing. 90 seconds. Michael held that position for 90 seconds, pouring fire into the German counterattack. 90 seconds that felt like hours. His squad, his company, used those 90 seconds to reorganize, establish a defensive line, set up their own machine guns. When Michael finally fell back to their position, out of ammunition, weapon barrel smoking, the German counterattack had stalled. The battle continued for another 2 minutes. More German attacks. More desperate defensive fighting. But the breakthrough held. Company B maintained their position, established a foothold that other units could exploit. By 7:05 a.m., the German line at Monte Cassino had been penetrated for the first time in the entire campaign. Casualty count for Company B, 43 wounded, 19 killed. Expected casualties had been 65 to 95 killed. Michael sat behind the defensive line, back against a rock, trying to breathe. His hands were shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. The BAR lay across his lap, barrel still hot enough to burn. Private Marchetti crawled over, stared at him. "What the fuck did you just do?" Marchetti's voice was hoarse, disbelieving. Michael didn't answer, didn't know how to explain. He'd just done what needed doing, the way he always had. Lieutenant William Hayes, Company B's acting commander after the original commander took shrapnel in the first assault, approached Michael's position. Hayes was 28, West Point graduate, 3 years of combat experience. He knelt down, looked at Michael's BAR, looked at Michael. "How many rounds?" Hayes asked. Michael tried to count. "Maybe 800? 900? Hayes picked up one of the empty magazines, still warm. This weapon should have failed. Michael looked at the BAR like it was an old friend. "It's good steel. Takes care of you if you take care of it." Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then, "You suppressed 7 machine gun positions and stopped a counterattack. You saved this entire assault. You know that?" Michael shrugged. "Just did my job, sir." Hayes shook his head. "That wasn't your job. That was, I don't even know what that was. But it's going in my report." Word spread through Company B before the end of the day, then through the battalion, then through the division. Not official channels, no reports, no announcements, just soldiers talking. "You hear about that condemned guy, the one with the court-martial? Held off a German company by himself. Impossible. Saw it myself, watched him suppress 7 MG positions with a BAR. Can't be done." "Yeah, well, he did it." Other soldiers started asking Michael questions. "How do you clean a BAR properly? How do you adjust for elevation? How do you know when the barrel's about to fail?" Michael answered patiently, showed them techniques, shared what he'd learned through 18 months of combat and 40,000 rounds of practice. It became informal training sessions, soldiers gathering around him during rest periods, learning from a man who'd turned a standard infantry weapon into something extraordinary through nothing but maintenance and skill. Company commanders noticed their soldiers cleaning weapons more thoroughly, noticed better fire discipline, more controlled bursts, higher hit rates, noticed casualty rates dropping slightly, not dramatic but measurable. A 7% reduction in combat deaths from equipment malfunction, a 12% increase in effective fire during engagements, small numbers, but in a division of 15,000 men fighting through Italy, those numbers translated to lives. The Germans noticed too. Interrogation of captured prisoners from the Monte Cassino sector revealed something unusual. German soldiers reported American automatic rifle fire that was unnaturally accurate and sustained beyond normal barrel life. An intelligence officer, Captain Ernst Weber, compiled a report suggesting Americans had deployed a new weapon or modified existing ones. German units facing the 34th Division started exercising more caution when they heard BAR fire, uncertain if they were facing standard weapons or something else. One German officer, Major Klaus Hartmann, encountered Michael's squad during a skirmish near Vinafro in March 1944. Hartmann's unit got pinned down by what he assumed was American machine gun fire. When he examined the position afterward, he found only .3006 casings, BAR ammunition, not .30 caliber machine gun rounds. He couldn't understand how one rifleman had generated that volume of accurate fire. His report to division headquarters noted American tactical innovation in light automatic weapons employment. The report recommended German squads maintain greater dispersion when facing American BAR positions. This psychological effect multiplied across the front. German soldiers became more hesitant, more cautious, less aggressive, not from fear of a new weapon, but from uncertainty about American capabilities. That uncertainty saved American lives. By April 1944, the 34th Division had pushed 30 miles north of Monte Cassino. Michael's squad had participated in 14 major engagements, 16 minor firefights, countless patrol actions. Michael's BAR had fired an estimated 68,000 rounds total. He'd replaced the barrel twice, both times reluctantly, only when the rifling had worn smooth. He'd gone through 12 trigger assemblies, 8 buffer springs, countless smaller parts. But the core weapon, the receiver, the bolt, the gas system, remained original, the same BAR he'd carried from Tunisia. April 19, 1944. 2:34 p.m. Patrol action near Cassino. Michael's squad was returning from a reconnaissance mission when they encountered a German patrol, 20 men, moving through a narrow valley. Both sides spotted each other simultaneously, dove for cover, opened fire. Standard firefight. Except Michael's BAR jammed. First time in 68,000 rounds. The bolt locked halfway back, wouldn't move forward or backward. Michael looked at the weapon, felt his stomach drop. He was the squad's base of fire. Without the BAR, they were outgunned. He tried to clear the jam. Couldn't. Tried to strip the bolt. Too tight. A German machine gun opened up, pinned his position. Private Marchetti was 30 feet away, firing his M1 Garand, running low on ammunition. He saw Michael struggling with the jammed BAR, saw him getting desperate. "St. Mike," Marchetti shouted. "Weapons down." Michael didn't respond, kept working on the bolt, fingers bloody from trying to force it. The German fire was getting closer, rounds hitting inches from his position. Then Michael stopped trying to fix it, just stopped. Looked at the weapon for a long moment. Then he unclipped a grenade from his web gear, pulled the pin, and threw it at the German position. Not random, precise. The grenade landed exactly where the machine gun's muzzle flash had been. Explosion. Screaming, the gun went silent. Michael grabbed his sidearm, a .45 automatic he'd never fired in combat, and moved toward the German position. Not running, walking, methodical, focused. He'd watched 5 men die from equipment failures in 1943. Watched Sergeant Morrison bleed out. Watched Sergeant Marcelli take his last breath. He wasn't going to let a jammed weapon kill anyone else in his squad. He reached the German machine gun position, 2 soldiers dead from the grenade, 3 more in the tree line behind it. Michael fired the .45. 5 shots, 5 hits, moved to the next position. More Germans trying to flank his squad. He engaged them at 15 yards with the pistol, dropped 2, forced the others to retreat. By the time he returned to his squad's position, the German patrol was withdrawing. The firefight lasted 6 minutes. American casualties, none. German casualties, 8 confirmed, 4 probable. Michael's squad survived because when his primary weapon failed, he adapted immediately without hesitation or panic. Lieutenant Hayes wrote it up in his report. Recommended Michael for Silver Star. It went nowhere. Condemned soldiers didn't receive medals. But something else happened. Michael's squad started carrying backup weapons religiously. Extra magazines for sidearms, grenades clipped where they could reach them fast. They'd learned from watching him, when primary systems fail, you adapt or you die. That lesson spread through Company B, then through the battalion. Within a month, soldiers throughout the 34th Division were carrying more backup weapons, training more extensively with sidearms, developing contingency plans for equipment failures. Another small improvement. Another percentage point added to survival rates. May 1944, Michael's 20-year sentence came up for review. Lieutenant Hayes testified via written statement, described Michael's actions at Monte Cassino and 17 subsequent engagements, described how his weapon discipline and tactical innovations had reduced casualty rates across the company, recommended sentence reduction. The reviewing board consisted of 3 colonels who'd never seen combat. They looked at Michael's original court-martial, assault on an officer, and decided the severity of the crime outweighed combat performance. Sentence upheld. 20 years. Michael received the news without reaction, kept cleaning his weapons, kept training new soldiers, kept fighting. The 34th Division pushed north through Rome, then into the Gothic Line, Germany's last major defensive position in Italy. Summer and fall 1944. Brutal mountain warfare. The Germans were retreating but fighting for every ridge, every valley. Michael's squad took 60% casualties between June and October. Replacement soldiers arrived weekly, 19 and 20 years old, terrified. Michael trained them, taught them how to maintain weapons, how to move under fire, how to stay alive. Most listened. Some didn't. The ones who didn't usually died. By November 1944, Michael had been in combat for 24 months. He'd participated in 41 major engagements and estimated over 100 firefights. He'd fired approximately 89,000 rounds. His BAR was on its 3rd barrel, but otherwise original. He'd trained approximately 60 soldiers in advanced weapon maintenance and fire discipline. He'd saved, by conservative estimates that Lieutenant Hayes compiled from after-action reports, 127 American lives through direct action and indirect training influence. The war in Italy was winding down. Germany was collapsing on multiple fronts. The end was visible. Michael's squad was down to 7 men, him and 6 others, all replacements from the last 3 months. They were assigned to a rear area security patrol on November 18, 1944. Routine assignment. Low risk, no contact expected. At 3:47 p.m., Michael's patrol encountered a German rearguard unit defending a bridge demolition team. The Germans were trying to deny the Allies a river crossing, standard retreating action. Michael's patrol should have called for support, waited for heavy weapons, standard doctrine. But the German demolition charges were already set. If the bridge went down, Allied advance would be delayed by days. Hundreds of casualties in the resulting delays. Michael looked at the 7 men with him, looked at the bridge, looked at his BAR, made a decision. He moved forward alone, using a drainage ditch for cover, got within 90 yards of the German position, set up the bipod, started firing. The Germans returned fire immediately, concentrated everything on his position. Michael kept firing, suppressed their machine gun, suppressed their riflemen, gave his patrol time to flank right, move into assault position. A German grenade landed 3 feet from Michael's position. He saw it, couldn't move, was locked in place by the weight of the BAR and the need to keep firing. The grenade exploded. Shrapnel hit his chest and left arm. He kept firing, blood running down his arm, soaking his uniform. Kept firing. Another magazine. Another. The patrol reached assault range, threw grenades, charged the position. The German unit broke, withdrew, left the bridge demolition charges undetonated. Allied engineers secured the bridge 20 minutes later. The crossing remained intact. Advance continued on schedule. Michael bled out before the medics reached him. Shrapnel had hit his subclavian artery. Fatal wound. He died sitting against a tree, BAR across his lap, 11 months and 15 days after Corporal Henshaw told him he'd die a criminal. Lieutenant Hayes wrote the after-action report personally, described Michael's final action, described his 24 months of combat performance, described how a condemned soldier had become the most effective infantryman Hayes had ever seen, recommended posthumous Medal of Honor. The recommendation went to division headquarters, then to corps headquarters, then disappeared into bureaucracy. A soldier serving a 20-year sentence for assaulting an officer couldn't receive the Medal of Honor. Policy was clear. Michael Donnelly was buried in the American Cemetery at Florence, Italy. Grave marker: Private Michael Donnelly, 34th Infantry Division. No medals listed, no special designation, just another dead soldier in a cemetery full of them. His personal effects were sent home to Philadelphia. His father, Patrick, received them in January 1945. Uniform, dog tags, a dozen letters Michael had written but never sent, and one item that confused Patrick: a worn, heavily modified Browning automatic rifle, serial number carefully noted, with a handwritten note from Lieutenant Hayes explaining that Michael had specifically requested this weapon be sent to his father if he died. Patrick Donnelly didn't understand why his son wanted him to have a gun, but he kept it, mounted it on the wall in his small house on Mifflin Street. When people asked about it, he'd tell them it was his son's service weapon. That was all. The war ended. Soldiers came home. The 34th Division was deactivated. Lieutenant Hayes returned to civilian life, became a high school teacher in Ohio. He never forgot Michael Donnelly. Every year on November 18th, he'd write a letter to the Army Board for Correction of Military Records, requesting Michael's dishonorable discharge be upgraded to honorable. Every year, he was denied. The assault conviction was permanent, irrevocable. But something else had survived. The weapon maintenance techniques Michael had taught spread through post-war training programs. Soldiers who'd served with him became instructors, passed on his methods. The emphasis on meticulous cleaning, on understanding your weapon's mechanical behavior, on preparing backup systems, these became standard doctrine. No one remembered where the practices originated. They just knew they worked. Statistical analysis of the 34th Infantry Division's casualty rates conducted in 1947 showed something unusual. Equipment-related combat deaths dropped 23% between February 1944 and November 1944. Researchers attributed it to improved maintenance protocols and tactical adaptations. The reports never mentioned Michael Donnelly, never connected the improvement to one condemned soldier's obsessive devotion to keeping weapons functional. Patrick Donnelly died in 1958, age 60, heart attack while working in the Navy Yard. Michael's younger brother Thomas inherited the house and the BAR. Thomas had been too young to serve in World War II, didn't really understand the weapon's significance. He donated it to a local VFW hall in 1962. It sat in a display case for 30 years, labeled WW2 Infantry Weapon, donated by Donnelly family. In 1994, a military historian named Dr. Jennifer Morrison was researching 34th Infantry Division combat records for a book on the Italian campaign of Kappa. She found Lieutenant Hayes's after-action reports, found the repeated Medal of Honor recommendations, found Michael's story. She tracked down the BAR at the VFW hall, examined it, noticed the serial number matched the weapon documented in Hayes's reports. She published her findings in 1997, Private Donnelly, the condemned soldier who changed infantry doctrine. The book got minimal attention. Academic circles found it interesting. General public didn't care. But it reached someone important, the Secretary of the Army. In 1990, 55 years after Michael's death, the Army Board for Correction of Military Records reviewed his case again. New evidence, new context, new understanding of how combat stress and flawed command decisions had contributed to the original incident. The board upgraded Michael's discharge to honorable, posthumously awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, second only to Medal of Honor, authorized proper recognition on his grave marker. The ceremony at Florence American Cemetery happened on November 18, 1990, exactly 55 years after his death. 23 people attended. 3 were veterans who'd served in Michael's battalion. They were all in their 70s now, gray-haired and slow-moving. They stood at attention while the new marker was placed. Nobody saluted. They just stood there, remembering a kid from Philadelphia who'd refused to let his weapon fail. The BAR Michael carried through 89,000 rounds now sits in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Placard beside it tells the story. Tells about Monte Cassino. Tells about the condemned soldier who became a legend. Most people walk past without reading it. But occasionally someone stops, looks at that worn weapon with its replaced barrel and modified components, and understands what it represents. Not heroism exactly. Not courage in the traditional sense, something simpler and more fundamental, the refusal to accept failure when lives are at stake, the willingness to break rules when rules become more important than survival, the stubborn insistence that equipment should work and that you're personally responsible for making it work. That's what Michael Donnelly represented. Not a hero, not a criminal, just a welder from South Philadelphia who knew that good steel, properly maintained, would never let you down, who knew that principles mattered more than regulations, who knew that sometimes the only way to keep people alive was to risk everything yourself. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees or engineering departments or official channels, through sergeants and privates who see a problem, understand a solution, and act despite the consequences. Through condemned men who fight like they have nothing to lose and everything to prove. Corporal James Henshaw, the guard who told Michael he'd die a criminal, lived until 2003. Before he died, he gave one interview about his time at Fort Leavenworth. He remembered Michael Donnelly clearly, remembered that conversation in December 1943. "I was wrong," Henshaw said quietly. "He didn't die a criminal, he died a soldier. Better soldier than I ever was." If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if you've heard similar stories of soldiers who changed doctrine through individual action. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.